back to part 2 of my bikepacking adventure in the Peak District. If you missed part 1, check it out here. Do you like the epic drone footage? I found some stock video of Winnats Pass and I couldn't resist. Here's a few more shots from the Peak District. In this video, I'll cover the last 2 days of the trip. Also, we'll see whether I make it up Winnats Pass on my Brompnot loaded with my bikepacking gear. I'll do an overview of the gear I brought too. Let's start at the morning of day 2. It rained overnight, but I was dry inside. There was very minimal condensation on the tent, which was surprising since it's essentially a single wall tent. It did clear up and I packed up quickly and set off for the climb I came to conquer. This was the longest stay I planned at 102 kilometers, but it ended up being around 95 kilometers. I think the initial Strava route did not end at the exact campsite I chose. My goal was to cycle up Winnats Pass without stopping. I figured it would be a good test to see if I could cycle in the Alps in future trips. It's a different kind of climb, but I thought that if I can do 20% for a couple hundred meters, I could probably do 8% over a longer distance. It probably doesn't work like that, but if you've tried Winnats Pass and some of the beautiful roads in the Alps, road bike or Brompton, let me know how they compare. I wasn't aiming for a specific time, so the plan was just to pace myself so I make it up to the top. The other thing to consider is that despite my light bike at 8.5 kilograms, I still had all my bikepacking gear with me, so the biking gear was about 17 kilograms. I probably weigh about 70 kilograms with the clothes I had on. Maybe too much information? So I'll be moving about 87 kilograms up Winnats Pass. Let's see how this goes. My understanding is that the Strava route starts at the grates and then ends at the grates at the top. I'll play the steeper part of the climb in the background here as I go over a few more trip details, so you have to wait a bit to see whether I make it up or not. Sorry, gotta keep the viewer retention numbers up, and hopefully this will be interesting information anyways. But if there is interest, I can also upload the entire segment with no voiceover and you can hear me struggle. I can try to sync the Strava data as well, but I don't have a power meter, so I think it'll only be speed and cadence information. Leave a comment below if that's something you'd want to see. Also, I would just like to thank everyone for the support so far. I'm aiming to upload once a week and I already have a list of videos I want to make, and that should at least take me a few months to get through. Please like and subscribe to get the videos in your feed. Let's talk about the climbing ability of this bike. For this ride, I had a 44 tooth chainring and 170mm long cranks, instead of the 42 tooth chainring and 162.5mm cranks I have on the build right now. See the video here. With shorter cranks, you have less torque per pedal stroke, so you would go slower per RPM, but conversely allowing for a faster cadence at the same travel speed, meaning less stress on your joints and muscles. As someone who doesn't output a ton of watts and doesn't ride that often, I prefer the ability to rely on higher cadence to get me up a hill. Also, I almost always ride seated. Between my mediocre bike handling skills and the 16-inch wheels, it always felt quite awkward to pedal out of the saddle, so I did this entire climb seated. For those familiar with gear inches, the lowest gear inch was 22.2. After this ride, I decided I wanted a lower gear, hence the 42 tooth front chainring on the current build. You can probably see why. Also, on my previous Brompton, I had an even lower gear range at around 18.5 gear inches, since I had dual chainrings. If you get to a climb with an unloaded bike that requires that kind of gear range, the front of the bike will start to lift. Ask me how I know. And a bit about footwear. I wore Giro trackers. They're meant for cycling, so are very grippy, with a relatively stiff sole. Unlike some models from brands like 510 that kind of look like skate shoes, these are quite minimalist. The toe box is also quite roomy, which I prefer. One hack that I discovered was that I could improve the grip on my pedal substantially by attaching a couple strips of skateboard grip tape to the middle of each pedal. The pedals I use are quite small, and in the past I've had my shoes slip off the pedal, but after attaching a small strip on each side of the pedal, it never happened again. While I continue to struggle in the background, I'll take some time to talk a bit about the gear I packed. Note that I've had quite a bit of experience wild camping, or backcountry camping as we call it in Canada, so I've had the chance to really test out the type of gear I like to bring. I'm a minimalist when it comes to camping, so you won't find a lot of creature comforts or cooking stuff here. It's also relatively affordable. The main items, cook set, down quilt, and tent can be had for less than £250. The Thermarest sleeping pad I use is quite expensive, but you can find budget substitutes. That means you can have a pretty solid camping setup for less than £300, which is the equivalent of a few days in a crappy hotel, so a worthwhile investment. I can do a more detailed unpacking and review of my gear in another video, but I'll just briefly go over what I brought on this specific trip. For the tent, I had the Nature Hike Vic 1, which is a one-person tent. It's very light at 1.1 kilograms, and it's freestanding. It's single wall for most of the tent, except the netting in the vestibule. As mentioned before, condensation surprisingly wasn't much of an issue. I'm always half expecting to be woken up by water dripping on my face from everything I've read about single wall tents. For sleeping insulation, I brought a down quilt. The brand is called Ice Flame, and it can be found on AliExpress. Camping quilts are a lightweight alternative to sleeping bags. Since the insulation you sleep on top of gets compressed and loses its insulating property anyways, the idea of a quilt is to get rid of the back panel. You should be getting most of your insulation from your sleeping pad, so losing the extra bit of compressed down is not a huge deal. The sides get tucked in underneath you and it surprisingly stays in place because of the attachment points. There's no hood, but for 3-season camping in the UK, a beanie is warm enough. Temperature rating is 5 to 15 degrees Celsius, but I don't think it's a standardized testing temperature rating that the big brands use. It weighs only 740 grams and it's very compact. Sleeping pad. I use a small-sized Thermarest X-Lite sleeping pad with a 4.5 R value. I use this tiny pad because of its weight and packability. This means my legs and feet are off the pad, but with wool socks I don't really feel the cold unless it's below 5 degrees. And if it does feel a bit cold, I can just put some leftover gear or clothes underneath my feet. Cooking gear. For this trip I only plan to boil water for my dehydrated meals. I brought a titanium pot with pan lid, titanium alcohol stove, windshield, spoon, lighter, and alcohol bottle. This all nests together in the pot. Clothing. For most of the ride, I wore a long-sleeve cycling jersey, long bib tights, and a gilet. In my bag, I have an orange waterproof jacket, which I ended up using a lot on the second day. I also have long underwear and a long-sleeve merino wool shirt for sleeping and spare socks. I also have a buff and a hat. Food. I brought 2 breakfasts, 2 lunch, and 2 dinner freeze-dry meals. So funny story, a couple weeks before this trip, Facebook Marketplace showed me a random ad of someone giving away 150 of these meal packs for free. They bought it during the COVID lockdowns and some were approaching their best before date, so they just decided to give it all away. Anyways, these things don't really expire, so now I'm set for a few years for camping meals. For tools and spares, I brought a spare Kojak tire and a bunch of spare niche Brompton parts that would be hard to find in case of an emergency. I also have my everyday carry tools, along with a Leatherman multi-tool. The front bag with the gear inside weighed around 6.3 kilograms. The tent and sleeping pad fit in the tent bag and is strapped to my frame rack. A bit about the front bag as well. It's from an Etsy seller who makes this style of bag as a handlebar bag for full-size bikes, but I gave them the details and specifications to add a rear slot for a Brompton 20x30 frame, and a few other adjustments to make it suitable for this kind of use. It's about 14 liter capacity, but the roll top makes it more expandable. It's also super lightweight since I made the bag frame myself out of 3D printed parts and carbon fiber tubes. The bag, the frame, and the 2 rear feedbacks weigh 960 grams. The Etsy seller is great, and the good thing is that you can customize the material color and pocket layout since they make it on demand. It only cost me £70 at the time, excluding the frame of course, but it's been a while since my friend ordered one with similar specifications, so I'm not sure if they kept the pattern and details for making another. I tried to get them to make a specific product link for it, but they didn't seem that interested. But if you are interested, let me know and I can try to put you in contact with them. They are also a Ukrainian-based business, so worth supporting for that reason as well. By now I think you'll have seen that I got past the hardest part, so without further ado, here's the Strava segment. Completed in 13 minutes and 45 seconds. Not bad on a Brompnot bikepacking gear if I do say so myself. For comparison, the fastest recorded time was 5 minutes and 26 seconds by the man Andrew Feather himself. And to be fair, he did have bigger wheels, so I think that made up most of the difference. Anyways, my goal is just to make it up, which I did, so I'm super happy with that. That was probably the most exciting part of my ride, but the rest of the day was still ahead. The rain started about 2 hours into the ride. It sucked at first, but once I was soaked through and embraced the wetness, it was fine. I didn't bring any waterproofs for my lower. I don't mind the wet legs, but I really should have brought a pair of overshoes. My course stayed dried and it wasn't particularly cold. There was all sorts of rough terrain. I rode through most of it except a couple overgrown sections and washed out areas with very deep ruts. I didn't want to risk a slashed sidewall. I was riding Schwab 1 tires, probably one of the thinnest, slickest tires you can get along with the Kojaks, and I was running the thin TPU tubes. I don't know what conclusion to draw about the tire/tube setup from this trip. Am I extremely lucky, or are city roads that much worse? I stopped at a pub in Harrington, about 54 kilometers into the ride for some rest and a pint. It really felt cold after sitting around for a while, but they had a fireplace, so it was a nice place to recharge some batteries. Eventually I moved to another cafe where I somehow ordered a meal of essentially all potatoes. I didn't know what was in the pie, but it turned out to be potatoes and leek or something. But can't complain about any warm food after a cold, wet ride, so it really hit the spot. Luckily the rain stopped by the time I finished eating, and it was an okay ride out. There was still a bit of rain throughout the ride, but by the time I got to camp, I was mostly dry except my feet. The campsite, Peak View campsite, for this night was terrible. The outhouse was disgusting and there was no running water. I was better off wild camping and saving my 10 pounds or however much it was for the site. It was a pretty long day of cycling, so made dinner, I posted on the Facebook group and went to bed. Day 3. There was a bit of morning rain, but I got packed up and started off in my wet shoes. I planned to stop at a small cafe nearby for breakfast. Just what I needed to start the day, and only 8 pounds with coffee. I planned to take it easy since I had a lot of time before the train back and I only planned about 40 kilometers. I did some sightseeing around Cromford Mills and went into a few shops there. I picked up this pair of scissors for £1 and thought about grabbing this king dick, but I already have a very I picked up this pair of scissors for £1 and thought about grabbing this king dick, but I already have a very nice vintage Craftsman adjustable. It was dry for the day, and there was a lot of great views, so it was a nice ride overall. I stopped in Rasley to check out the little shopping center there, but it was very depressing on an empty Monday afternoon. And that's pretty much for this trip. I got back to Chesterfield and I think I took a late afternoon train back to London. Despite the rain, I think it was great overall. I got to test my bike and my body with the climb up Winnats Pass with no mechanical issues. And I got to see a lot of places I wouldn't have otherwise had the chance to see without being on two wheels. I hope to come back to the Peak District in the future and do some of the off-road and gravel trails since they look great. Anyways, thanks for watching and I hope you like and subscribe so you can follow me for more content in the future. Thanks.